Hello, fellow PlotQuesters. Today I have this book, The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. Well, to say it's a book would be kind of wrong because it is indeed a play script. So if you see it is a play script. It is in this format, so that's fun. And let's get straight into it. So I'm a little bit sick today, so I'm gonna speak a bit quiet, but I have a mic on, so hopefully that should cancel each other out. So as usual, I will start with a summary, then I will go into some analysis of literary devices, then I will end off with a rating for the book. So let's get straight into it. So first of all, before we even begin with scenes 1 to 7, we have the production notes. The production notes, I usually don't read the production notes of something like this, but my god, the production notes are just so well written. And you might be thinking, how would production notes, which is like the notes the writer of the play gives the director of a play to do certain things, how can that be literary? Alright, listen to this quote. Another extra literary accent in this play is provided by the use of music. A single recurring tune, the Glass Menagerie, is used to give emotional emphasis to suitable passages. This tune is like circus music, not when you're on the grounds or in the immediate vicinity of the parade, but when you're at some distance and very likely thinking of something else. It seems under those circumstances to continue almost interminably, and it weaves in and out of your preoccupied consciousness. Then it is the lightest, most delicate music in the world, and perhaps the saddest. It expresses the surface vivacity of life with the underlying strain of immutable and inexpressible sorrow. Tennessee Williams, even in these production notes, describes the tone, the emotional tone that he wants, and how each component of the play, including the music, the screen device, the lighting, how those things contribute towards creating the vibe that he wants. And I'll talk about this more later, but this is a memory play, a plastic theater. It's not meant to be necessarily realistic or dramatic. However, what it does put emphasis on is this dreamy atmosphere. And the lighting and the screen device and everything else and the music is all supposed to contribute to that. And I love how he describes this idea of the music acting as this kind of symbolic device within this lovely book, within this play, I guess, as well. It's just amazing, and I really enjoyed that. And when I read it, I wowed out loud. I was like, god damn, jeez. So very, very cool. Now let's get into kind of scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, scene 4, scene 5, scene 6, and 7. I'll be pretty brief. So in scene 1, we're introduced to our 3 main characters, Tom, Amanda, and Laura. Tom is kind of the narrator of the play, and this entire play is framed as Tom looking back on his memories with his family. And seeing that he's wearing a sailor suit at the beginning of scene 1, we can assume that he has left his family. Meanwhile, Amanda is a Southern belle. She comes from an old colonial family, a family who had slaves, a plantation family. So there, if you want to do it, you can have like a little post-colonial lens here. But she's basically kind of obsessed with her past when she was rich and she had all these suitors, and she was a lady of a plantation, right? So she was very, very loaded. But now she's just, an impoverished, part of an impoverished family, barely getting along, and she's kind of stuck in that past in Blue Mountain, is what she calls it. Then we have Laura. Laura is the focal point of the play. She is Tom's sister and Amanda's daughter, and she's crippled slightly on the leg, and she's also has a kind of social anxiety, which makes it difficult for her to speak and interact with other people. And we kind of get all of these things introduced in the first scene. We also get introduced to the concept of a gentleman caller. The gentleman caller is essentially, Amanda, when she was in Blue Mountain, when she was in these plantations, when she was super rich, apparently got all of these 14 gentleman callers, I think she says, or a ridiculous number of gentleman callers. They're essentially suitors that come over to your house, sit down, and kind of have a meal and try to impress you with their social skill and the art of conversation, as Amanda would put it. And we get introduced to this concept because it'll become important later, and that's scene 1. So we're introduced to our characters and what they're like. And we're also introduced to the concept of the gentleman caller. And also, I guess, we see that Tom is kind of annoyed at Amanda, and he seems very tired of his life as a shoemaker currently, is what he's doing. Scene 2. Scene 2 is a conflict between Amanda and Laura. Laura, which she was supposed to go to Rubicam's Business College to learn how to type, because if she learns how to type, she can become self-sufficient. She can be a woman, an independent woman, essentially, I guess, in modern terms. But apparently she's dropped out of Rubicam's Business College, and instead, during that time, she's been going to the art museum and birdhouses. And Amanda finds out about this, and she's just like, what am I supposed to do with you? What should I do with you? And eventually she concludes on, you need a gentleman caller. If you can't get a job, you might as well get married. And I'll talk about this a bit later, but I think this reveals a lot about the context of the play. It's set in around 1937 at the lowest recession in the Great Depression, which says a lot. So, people were desperate for money, for financial stability. Maybe the marriage also has something to do with that. So we also are introduced to Laura's glass menagerie and the use of a Victrola. What is the glass menagerie? So I think this little cover art, I think this is meant to represent what it is. But essentially, she has a collection of glass figures, and that's like the joy of her life, right? She's like a shut-in otaku with her anime figures, except they're like glass figures, and she plays with them. She cleans them, etc. This is the light of her life, right? So that is her way of escaping from the real world. The Victrola, again, is a kind of device that plays music, and she plays all kinds of different kind of relaxing music on it. So we can see that through those two things within this scene, we see her kind of try to use those two things to kind of escape from the social confrontation with her mother, to escape from the social reality that she's been put in. So we see that's kind of Laura's coping mechanism. That's kind of the escapist element of the play. Scene 3. Scene 3 is a conflict between Tom and Amanda. Essentially, Amanda and Tom kind of blow up. We don't know exactly how the argument starts because we're dropped in the middle in medias res style. But essentially what happens is Tom is tired. He's working, obscene hours in a day to get basically no money at a shoemaker's. At a shoemaker's, and he wants to be a poet, he wants to be a writer, he wants to travel the world, and he wants to go on adventures, but he's stuck here because he can't do any of that because he needs to provide for his family. He's forced to provide for his family, and those social responsibilities are tying him down. And when Amanda kind of pokes that, straw breaks the camel's back. They yell at each other. They have a shouting match. She calls Amanda a babbling old witch, while Amanda calls him a big idiot. We can kind of see she's from a gentler origin, as we already know. She's kind of a lady from a plantation, whatever. And we get, and I really, in this scene, I actually really resonated with Tom, because as an aspiring writer, I get the frustration of real life getting in the way of what you actually want to do with your writing. And especially for Tom, that social reality is quite depressing, right? Haha, pun intended, the Great Depression, which again I'll talk more about later. So I think that is quite the scene. And it ends with Tom knocking over one of Laura's figures and it's shattering on the ground. And it also ends with Amanda saying, I'm not going to talk to you until you apologize. Scene 4, Tom apologizes. Amanda and Tom get along and they start scheming. Amanda asks Tom to bring someone from work that he knows that's kind of a decent person as a gentleman caller for Laura to set them up. Scene 5. We find out Tom decided to get Jim O'Connor as the gentleman caller, and he'll come later. And she's like, and he'll come tomorrow, I mean. And Amanda is like, oh my gosh, and tomorrow I need to prepare Laura and prepare the house, etc., etc. And then they like pray on the moon, which I believe is symbolic of like a last hope type of thing. Scene 6, Jim arrives. Laura faints because of the social pressure, because we realize that Jim is actually Laura's childhood crush. I forgot to mention that, but in scene 2, Laura mentions how she had a crush on a high school boy named Jim O'Connor. She was this charming Irish guy. He was the debate captain of the school. He was, he sung, he was kind of like the popular guy. All the girls were after him, and his future seemed bright. And he called her Blue Roses, which is again an interesting symbolic device, which I'll break down later, because she once had pleurosis and he misheard it as Blue Roses, and he started calling her Blue Roses, which is cool. And apparently, the guy that Tom brought over as the gentleman caller is Jim O'Connor. And we see Jim O'Connor is kind of the opposite of Tom, right? He's essentially a fold character, where we have Tom who is depressed, wants to get out of here, hates the American dream, he wants to go out on an adventure. Jim is the perfect definition of the American dream. He's a hard worker. He's taking night classes for public speaking. He wants to get a promotion. He wants to get ahead in the world. And we have this character that's quite interesting and actually is described as a perfectly ordinary young man in the character description in the casting list. So that's Jim O'Connor right there. Then we have scene 7. Scene 7 is the final scene. So in this scene, Jim and Laura kind of have a conversation over wine. They recall on their childhood memories, and we can see there's chemistry. There's some fire in the air. And then, guess what happens? Jim and Laura dance, then they kiss. Oh my gosh, are they getting together? And then we find out Jim has a fiance, and he leaves, and that's the end of the play. Oh, and also, by the way, Tom in scene 6, I forgot to mention, reveals that he didn't pay the light bill and instead gave that money to the merchant seaman. So he could presumably get out of here. And at the end of scene 7, it seems that he does leave, but he seems to be regretting that and what he did to Laura. And that is the glass menagerie. So let's go through some analysis. First of all, there's three contextual things that are super important. The first is the context of the Great Depression. So I think this play does an excellent job exploring the pressures of the Great Depression. You either need to learn how to work, or you need to get married with someone who can work. Financial stability is of the utmost priority, and we see that context reflected in the glass menagerie in the form of societal pressures of Laura and Tom and Amanda, etc. The context of the fallen South. So basically, again, the mother is from a plantation family. So if you analyze that through a colonial lens, we can kind of have this idea of how, Amanda is from a different time. We see her use some pretty not age-appropriate terms, terms that are pretty much considered slurs right now. But we can, through that, understand the historical context of the South, of the Civil War. And that's a very important context. And there's this kind of romanticization of the old South as a place that's less driven by this kind of financials, where back in Blue Mountain I didn't have to scrap for food and be desperately trying to get money, So that kind of thing is kind of represented in this play. Finally, the most important context is the context of Tennessee Williams' sister, Rose. Rose was lobotomized, and that kind of ruined her life. And Tennessee Williams spent the entirety of his life using all of the money that he got in his career as a successful playwright to support Rose. And although she did end up outliving him, he lived in this everlasting permanent guilt that he couldn't stop the lobotomy, and that killed Rose, or who she was. If you don't know what a lobotomy is, it's a horrible, terrible, scientifically multiple disproven surgical procedure where you stick a needle through your eye, and it messes with a part of your brain, and it basically makes you like a plant. It makes you, well, basically, in back in the day, apparently they used to lobotomize mostly women who were too loud or too energized, to make them docile, to fix them. It's absolutely horrible and terrible, and it gives me it's like a horror movie to me. I would genuinely crash out. It made me crash out when I first found out about it. Excuse me. So essentially, she got lobotomized. Tennessee Williams lived in permanent guilt. Tom is kind of the personification of Tennessee Williams in this play, so we can assume that this play is also a way for Tennessee Williams to reflect on his guilt about not stopping Rose's lobotomy through this interesting play. Because, Laura is obviously a representation for his own sister. Now, let's talk about devices. So, first of all, this is a memory play. So, this means that this entire play is very dreamlike, with an emphasis on Laura. It's the memory of Tom. Tom is narrating us through his old memories, and to emphasize that, we have this kind of lighting emphasis on Laura because she's the highlight of the memory. We have the dreamlike music, and also, if you want to go even further, the last scene has the most length and the most emphasis, which makes me think that Tom, that's the most recent memory, but that's also the memory that Tom is the most traumatized by. Right, and then there's the symbol of the glass menagerie and the Victrola. So obviously they're both, there's a lot of symbols for escapism within this play. Each character is escaping from the social reality of the Great Depression through various different things. Laura, the most important character, is doing so through the Victrola by playing music and by playing with her glass figures. That is her way of escaping from the dastardly reality of the world. That's her way of coping. And the fact that the glass menagerie piece breaks in scene, I think I might have said that. Yeah, so yeah, in scene 7 and also in scene 3 when Tom and Amanda are conflicting. So we have 2 instances where they broke. In scene 7, Jim ends up breaking the horn off the unicorn, and in scene 3, Tom manages to shatter one. So I think those are cases where, you know, reality, the social reality is so extreme, so impactful that impacts kind of the dreams of the person, and it doesn't allow you to escape. And the fact that the horn of the unicorn has been broken off may represent that Laura has become more mature. She will no longer escape into the fantasies of her glass menagerie, but at what cost, right? And I think that's another huge focal point and a very important symbol. And then there's the peripeteia in scene 7. So the peripeteia is a kind of sudden reversal in fortune, and we see that when we're like, oh my gosh, Jim and Laura kissing, and then oh my god, Jim has a fiance and you kissed Laura, you're a really bad person. Anyways, that peripeteia, that sudden reversal of fortune, I guess almost happens twice, right? With oh it's going well and the oh it's going terrible. So those two, I feel like, leaves a really big impact on the reader, and I think it's important because I think it emphasizes how, you know, bending Laura towards the social reality of the Great Depression and forcing her to kind of adapt. And, you know, maybe it is for her own good, but it left irreparable scars on her. And I think it might even be a metaphor for the lobotomy that Rose had to go through, right? Where it's for her own good, which I strongly and highly doubt. I think that's completely stupid, but and immoral. But at the time, Tennessee Williams might think, okay, this medical procedure might have been necessary, but it irreparably damaged Rose's character. And maybe he sees this entire process as the lobotomy of conforming to societal pressures, and then at the end, his kind of regret of making her do that, and the unicorn's horn is snapping off, right? So I think the peripeteia works to emphasize that main underlying message. And then finally, there's the symbol of blue roses. So Laura obviously talked about Jim, about how he used to call it blue roses, pleurosis, etc. I already explained this. And blue roses actually represents unrequited love in the context of like kind of what the flower symbolizes, or longing or serenity. So it kind of represents how Laura was never meant to be with Jim, and how her love will remain unrequited forever. It's kind of sad, it's melancholy, but it is a beautiful symbol. So that was my summary and analysis of the Glass Menagerie. I will give this a 9.9 out of 10. Actually, I'll give this a 10 out of 10 because I genuinely think there's nothing could particularly be improved. It's one of the most perfect stories that I've just ever read. It made me so emotional, and the fact that these are just, you know, ordinary scenes, right? A mother and daughter arguing, a son and a mother arguing. You know, these are very domestic scenes, and it's all set in essentially a house, an ordinary house. But the fact that Tennessee Williams brings so much beautiful energy and atmosphere into it, it just makes this play absolutely perfect and a joy to read. Before I end off, I would like to read scene 1's description of the setting. So I'm gonna quickly do that. The Wingfield apartment is in the rear of the building, one of those vast hive-like conglomerations of cellular living units that flower as warty growth in overcrowded urban centers of lower middle-class population, and are symptomatic of the impulse of this largest and fundamentally enslaved section of American society to avoid fluidity and differentiation, and to exist and function as one interfused mass of automatism. The apartment faces an alley and is centered by a fire escape, a structure whose name is a touch of accidental poetic truth. For all of these huge buildings are always burning with the slow and implacable fires of human desperation. The fire escape is part of what we see, that is, the landing of it and the steps descending from it. The scene is memory and is therefore non-realistic. Memory takes a lot of poetic license. It omits some details, others are exaggerated, according to the emotional value of the articles it touches, for memory seated predominantly in the heart. The interior, therefore, is rather dim and poetic. So that's not all of it, but that's kind of the first 3 paragraphs, and it just, that description, that atmosphere, that beauty, I think is just so well captured. This melancholy of a capitalist society, the critique on capitalist society and the context of the Great Depression. I think Tennessee Williams does an absolute masterful job. He is truly a master of his craft. I just absolutely love this play, and I would highly recommend for everyone to read this. And like always, your PlotQuester, Aaron the PlotQuester. Have a great day, everyone. I would highly, highly, highly recommend.